Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for Tuesday, May 23rd. First on the agenda is roll call. Let the record show that Commissioners Argionis, Aragoni, Bennett, Giannetti, Hanlon, Mills, and Zemaitis are present, and our council liaison, Alderman Wilkening. Second on the agenda is the approval of the minutes.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Are there any comments or corrections? None? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Third on the list is a public hearing. Case number 17-12-SU, special use for a health fitness center in the O Office District at 444 Northwest Highway, Suite 204. This is a public hearing. That means a couple of things. First of all, anybody who's going to be coming up and giving testimony, I will need you to stand and raise your right hand, even if you're thinking about it. Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please say, I do. Very good. Secondly, if you would please come up, if you're going to give testimony, speak into the microphone, and please give your name and address. And if everybody up here would please speak into the microphone, we've had some problems in the past. I know you don't have a problem.
Never.
John.
Okay, for the first case, this is a special use request to allow the operation of a health and fitness center in the O Office District at 444 Northwest Highway, Suite 204. The applicant plans to operate the center in a 910 square foot tenant space. The use will focus on private fitness appointments, and the applicant has provided a statement outlining the details of the business and proposed operations. I've provided a brief staff analysis regarding the comprehensive plan and the district requirements. Parking requirements will be met, and the review standards for special use recommendation and approval are included within the memo, and I'll turn it over to the applicant for any additional presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Steve Bauer. I'm an attorney with Meltzer, Pertel, and Stell here this evening on behalf of the Perfect Workout, Inc. As the petitioner. I'm joined this evening by Vanya Petsanova as a representative of the Perfect Workout, as well as by Matt Friedman as a representative of the property owner. As Mr. Branham indicated, the request that's put before you today is for a health/fitness center, which is the defined term that the city's zoning code uses for a use of this nature. As a practical matter, this request is not much like a health/fitness center, or what people might traditionally call a gym. There are no mirrors, there are no treadmills, there are no free weights, no aerobics, no shower facilities. None of the things that you would probably typically associate with a facility like this, except for some Nautilus machines. So all the physical activity that's done is done by way of machine weights, not by way of the things that you would otherwise likely associate with a gym or health center. Before proceeding further, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure, as a matter of housekeeping, that the complete petition, which is in the black binder that you hopefully all have, and includes the letter of request and the responses to the standards of review, has been or will be incorporated into the record.
It will be.
Thank you. The request is quite straightforward. The city's zoning code specifically authorizes as a special use a health/fitness center that's tantamount by law as an indication of legislative finding that this type of a request is appropriate in the district in which it's located. As you can see or hopefully have reviewed, there are detailed responses to the standards of review that have been provided relative to each of the 11 standards of review. Because this is merely occupation of an existing tenant space with no need for tenant build-out modifications or by any means site modifications, there's not a whole lot of review required or associated with the request. Importantly, this type of location for this applicant is much like all of their other locations. In fact, for their 6 other Illinois locations or Chicago area locations, They are also just like this context in a professional or corporate center or executive center where they're operating alongside, law offices or dental clinics or doctor's offices, things of that nature. So it's not at all unlike the environment in which they've operated to date. For that reason, there's really no concern or should be no concern that there will be some sort of disruption caused by the applicant's activities. As the letter of request indicates, the hours of operation during which the applicant operates are typically 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. They offer 30-minute time slots for on an appointment basis for clients who are seeking to come in for a 20-minute session. So within a given hour, one trainer can only see a maximum of 2 patients or clients. In a worst-case scenario, you might have 2 trainers who are there at one time, so you have 2 clients or patients at the same time. So you're talking about a total occupancy of 4 people per hour. So I mentioned that specifically with respect to parking demand. I don't know if you are personally familiar with this location, but it has a pretty abundant parking lot. I was there today at 10:30. I saw more parking spaces than I was able to count at the time. I would say, probably somewhere in the area of 50. I feel like that's probably as good of a gauge as any, at a time other than lunch hour, or at least in the first half of the day where people might be leaving early for the day. That's likely to be the heaviest demand, parking demand for a facility of this type. In addition, I just want to indicate, because I'm not sure this made it into your packet, that the applicant has received a letter of support from an adjacent tenant, and that goes obviously to the point of there being compatibility between the tenants. Thank you, I appreciate that. So given that you have it, I won't read it into the record, but I do want to ask that it at least be incorporated into the record, again, as a demonstration of compatibility and harmony with adjacent uses. I don't know that there's a whole lot more that you really want me to get into, because I suspect that you've had an opportunity to look at these materials, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And, again, would ask that you focus specifically on the standards of review, which are the basis, of course, upon which you evaluate a request of this nature.
Any questions for the applicant? Yes.
The way the wording is in the documents provided, it sounds like medical, health clinic, whatever, fitness, like physical therapy or whatnot. So the people there that are working with, the customers or whatever, are they occupational therapists and registered physical therapists, or?
I think that would be an inaccurate characterization to call them physical therapists. They are certified trainers. They have a certification, or in some cases multiple certifications. So it's akin to what like a physical therapist would have, but I think probably a different level of credential. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think what you're referring to, by the way, with respect to the documentation, is probably the letter of request and the reference to physical therapy. What I think is important to note here is that this use is very similar to a physical therapy office, both in terms of physical layout, equipment provided, and services offered. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes the clientele for this operation, for this location and all locations generally speaking, is an older clientele. Oftentimes retirees, oftentimes individuals who may have arthritic conditions. So I'm not a physician, I couldn't pretend to be one, but generally speaking, I think people know that to treat things like arthritic conditions, you kind of have 2 options. One is like a cortisol shot, the other is working or exercising the area that is arthritic. In this case, they frequently work with individuals who have arthritic conditions to try to alleviate the pain associated with that condition.
I guess just looking at this, I'm in my mind, I see a difference between physical therapy facility and a gym, and I'm trying to see that distinction here.
I completely appreciate the distinction you're making, but I think what's important is that, this is not what you would typically associate with a gym. If you happen to have in front of you the letter of request, if you look specifically at like the 3rd paragraph, you can see that, this facility or any of their studios nationwide don't offer running, jogging, aerobics, court sports, swimming, locker rooms, showers, massage rooms, saunas. There's no mirrors. It's not what you would typically associate with a gym. It's not an LA Fitness or, some other type of conventional gym. It's really a small-scale facility designed to assist people on a limited basis for this specific program. They have a patented program that they offer that's only offered in 20-minute sessions, and it only requires clients or individuals to attend twice a week.
So we're not looking at, like, you're targeting the tenants of the building to do their workouts in the morning or after work, that type of stuff. It's more of a client-based, appointment schedules, and things like that.
Exactly. One-on-one specifically, appointment-based, yes.
Okay. I have a question for, you said the building owner was here?
Yes, there is a building owner representative here. This is Matt Friedman.
So, if you don't mind, the occupancy of the building, is it,
In terms of the
up?
mix of tenants?
Well, I'm looking at more of the and I don't necessarily need to have a number of vacancies that you
Oh,
have.
the percent occupancy?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have that with me.
I mean, would you say it's getting filled up, or it's
Yeah,
not?
it's getting there. I mean, it's certainly a lot better since we purchased the building several years ago. We still have a few vacant spaces, but we've filled it up quite a bit. There's still some available spaces, but
Have you had any issues with parking where there
No.
wasn't enough spots or anything?
No,
I'm
not at
looking
all.
at, I'm looking at the photo you guys included in the packet, and you can see it is a fairly large lot, and the requirement is for 4 spaces. I don't see a high demand there. But I guess my concern would be if you went to 100% occupancy.
we'd still be okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that the last thing that I'd want to do, whether it's this tenant or any other tenant, is put somebody in a multi-tenant building that would cause some problem
Sure.
down the road.
Okay.
And we're comfortable with them. We're happy with them. We welcome them to the building. And I think they'll be a good addition.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. There is, yeah. So in addition to what you can see on that, I don't have in front of me what you have, but there's also a parking garage underneath. So there's a number of spaces that you can't see on there as well.
Okay. And a question for John. Do you know what based on the current use of the building, how many spaces are allocated for existing tenants?
Allocated for existing?
Yeah, for existing uses. So we're adding an additional, 4 spaces that are going to be used for this applicant. I'm just wondering what, based on the existing uses, what the required number of spaces they need are.
I don't have that information right now.
Okay. Okay, that's it for me.
Any other
I-
questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Are you already actually located in the office space?
They are.
Okay,
So,
because I saw a picture in there and,
correct, yeah. So this is explained in some detail in the letter of request, but I'd be happy to reiterate it here. A long story short, again, sort of, I'm sorry, is it Zamatis? Is that how you pronounce it?
It is.
I'm Rebecca
Zematis.
Mills. That's okay.
No, I understand.
Oh, okay.
But-
Oh,
but-
what she asked, okay.
Exactly. To Commissioner Zematis' question, this owner and operator of the Perfect Workout is an out-of-state corporation, both primarily located out of state and also headquartered out of state. So it was, plainly speaking, uncertain of the applicability of this process and the need for a special use permit. In fact, it I think for reasonable reasons at least, thought that based on the definition of medical/dental clinics, it was an authorized use. As soon as it found out that it needed to go through this process, it ceased operations in accordance with the city staff's request, and then the city staff was kind enough to issue a temporary certificate of occupancy to afford them the ability to operate, at least on a temporary basis, of course, until we're able to gain, the necessary special use permit approval to enable them to be there on a permanent basis.
Okay. The reason I was asking that is when I looked at the picture, it looks a lot like the physical therapy office that I've been to on that same floor.
Right, advanced physical therapy, agreed, understood completely. That's exactly the point I was trying to make earlier. I think I may have also included in the packet a copy of the some of the photos on Advanced Physical Therapy's website.
Yeah.
It'd be difficult to distinguish the two, in my estimation, but I appreciate the comment because I think that's directly in line with reality.
All right, thank you.
May I ask how long were they in operation prior to the city stopping them?
I think it's somewhere in the area of 6 months. You know, because it's a remote use, you know, you're talking about basically 1.5% of the total building, and it's on the second floor. There's no exterior signage. You know, the reality is, I don't think anybody really noticed that they were operating, nor did they have
You're
reason.
their attorney, I think you'd know whether they noticed or not. You'd know how long they were operating. How long were they operating this lease? The building owner would know.
Well, I didn't.
When did they sign the lease? I'm just curious how long they were operating. Doesn't really matter for purposes of rezoning, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know the exact date. I would say around 6 months.
Within the last
sounds
year.
about
Okay.
right, yeah.
All right, that's good.
I'm sorry to not answer the question more directly. I wasn't involved in the leasing process, so I, you know, don't have that firsthand knowledge.
Any other questions from the commission? Yes.
So the other facilities that I saw photos in there, is there any, I guess, measures, like in the future, should it become, you know, the thing that everybody wants to do this, and it, you know, it picks up pace, and then you need more people in there, and then, you know, expanding, and then you're gonna have more cars and, you know, vehicle traffic, whatnot. I mean, is there,
How would that be addressed? Is that what you're asking?
I'm sorry?
How would that be addressed? Is that what you're
I
asking?
mean, have they experienced this at other places? And is that something that we would expect here? So even though we say, you know, in here we say, oh, it's only 4 spots, but, you know, 2 years down the road, this is, you know, the best thing since sliced bread, and now they're,
There's a
you know what I
significant
mean?
demand, sure.
I mean, has that happened at any of the other facilities?
Well, your point's well taken, but I think what's important to keep in mind is that the nature of this use and the physical constraints in terms of the amount of space limit them to only really being able to accommodate a maximum of 2 clients per hour. That's required really for 2 reasons. Number one, the fact that there are only 9 machines at this studio and all studios for this user means that, you know, there's really not an opportunity to have, you know, more than 2 clients at any one time, because then you're in a situation where you have clients waiting to use a machine, which is obviously undermining sort of the quality of the service provided. And number 2, the practical reality is that they just don't really have the ability, because these are 20-minute sessions, they don't really have the ability to take on additional clients, because they're, again, based on the site constraints, the physical space that they occupy and the number of machines that they offer, they never really have the ability to be providing a greater level of service like you're suggesting.
Okay.
Any other questions from the commission? Is there anybody from,
Really quick, last question. How much space do they take up in that building? How many square feet?
910 square feet.
That's what I thought. No, okay. Thank you. So,
is there anyone from the audience who wishes to speak? Yes. Please come forward to the microphone.
I don't think I need a microphone.
Please state your name and your address.
My name's Javier Costantino. I live at 457 Northwest Highway.
And you've been sworn in?
Yes. Just really briefly, I live across the street. I think this is a great process. I'm just curious why, I mean, what's confusing, I got this letter, 3 copies of it, because I have 3 PIN numbers. So that seemed a little bit odd that no one noticed that it was going to the same person 3 times at $8 a crack for certified mail. So that besides the point. Health Fitness Center, I mean, you're taking care of 2 people. Why? Isn't there another applicable use? I mean, they're not physicians, so they can't call it a doctor's office or anything like that. They have to go through this whole
Correct.
protocol. Okay. That was my only observation otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the audience? I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Any more deliberation?
I have nothing.
Then I'll be looking for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve case number 17-12-SU, a special use to allow an operation of a health fitness center in the O Office District at 444 Northwest Highway, Suite 204. And include the findings of facts as presented in our packet.
I'll second that.
Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. No more public hearings. Under other items tonight, we had the concept plan review for a planned development, townhomes at 1440 Higgins Road. John, I apologize, I was not here last meeting. We went to,
Oh, okay. Anyway, well, this is very quickly, this concept plan was initially reviewed by the commission on May 9th, 2017. At that meeting, the commission discussed several aspects of the plan, and the meeting minutes have been included for everyone's review. Since that meeting, the applicant has made adjustments to the plan and is seeking further guidance from the commission. The adjustments include reducing the number of units from 34 to 31 and increasing the front and rear setbacks at the property. Additional exterior parking spaces have also been added. The overall height has been reduced. Vehicular access to Higgins Road has also been eliminated. Again, this is a concept plan which is allowed before the commission for the purpose of obtaining information and general guidance prior to entering into a formal commitment, and we would require a map amendment and a stage 1 and stage 2 approval, which will require a public hearing before any other approvals would be received. Note that because this is a review of a concept plan and not a review of a formal application, staff is not offering a full and comprehensive analysis of the proposal. However, that the site information has been updated. We have reviewed the Higgins Road corridor issues with this presentation, and you will note in the staff report that the director has also provided some comments, mostly regarding the impact on schools, and has also identified that the Planning and Zoning Commission should weigh the major issue with the proposal if it is prudent for the city to agree to the conversion of this site identified primarily as a commercial redevelopment site. So I'll turn it over to the applicant for an additional update.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Paul Kolpak. I represent 1440 Higgins LLC. Again, thank you very much. You were kind enough to meet with us on May 9th. To make it short, Mr. Guido Neri, our architect, is going to go over the site plan. You did have about 5 or 6 different things that you wanted us to try to incorporate in. I believe Mr. Neri will show you that we have brought that into play for this site. Guido?
I have additional packets, but I think you have updated packets, right? Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Guido Neri with Neri Architects, 444 Northwest Highway, the building you just talked about in Park Ridge. So what we did for the changes we made, as Mr. Branham already stated, were to we took all your feedback into account at the last meeting, and we made all the changes. And I just wanted to briefly take you through them because there's a couple of minor explanations. First of all, the density was reduced from 34 units to 31. And as you can see, we eliminated the cut-through, which was at that end, at the east end. We eliminated a cut-through from Peterson to Higgins. We did increase all the setbacks to the required setbacks. There is one minor exception, and that is if you look at the dotted line here along Higgins, which is the required 30-foot setback, you see that the very last unit, about 2 feet of it is clipped and falls within that required setback. So that would be the only variation that we would be seeking. And then we did reduce the building height, but we did keep the rooftop deck. What we did is we sunk the building so that when you do pull in off of the property, you actually ramp down 2.5 to 3 feet to get to all the parking, which reduces the overall height to under 35 feet. And that's how we reduce the height. Other than that, everything else as far as what you saw last time, the renderings and the elevations, the style is, we're still proposing the same type of style, the same type of rendering. Again, you know, we're vacating the Peterson, the portion along Peterson to widen the street to make it a full width street. And that's really all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just on, you mentioned that on the parking, you're going to be depressing the elevation.
Correct.
Is that the side ramps are going to do that, and so now your elevation at the parking garages are all level, or do you actually go down at the parking garage itself?
No, the ramp, so when you pull in off the property, you ramp down. By the time you get to the end here,
Yeah.
you're down to that 3 foot. So this is all level,
Gotcha.
but below the sidewalk.
All right.
So your building technically is still more than 34 feet. It's just you're deciding where you're going to measure the low point from.
Well, it's 35 feet at the property line, which I believe is the measurement that is used.
Yes.
At the last meeting, I don't remember who had mentioned they were gonna coordinate with the fire department on the routing through by removing that, cut through to Higgins. Everything's kosher with the fire department, the way it's laid out now?
We haven't gotten that far yet, but I will tell you that the width of the road is a pretty standard dimension that is used, and it does allow for emergency vehicles. So I believe we're going to be fine with that. But we haven't gone through that formal application process yet.
My thought is, and again, you haven't done it yet, but my thought is you'll never get a truck back there. You might get an ambulance back there. But in reality, they wouldn't fight a fire from that road.
No, because you've got so much fronted on Peterson and Higgins, that's where they're going to pull up.
I did think about that, though. So this is still a pretty dense development. And I'm still struggling with the concept of this being all residential. I really, I've been struggling with this, giving up this commercial spot along Higgins. I see the value on Peterson. I mean, if you drive down Peterson, 3/4 of the south side of Peterson is already townhomes, right?
Right,
It's all single family on the other side.
right.
But giving up this parcel for a residential development in you know, the planning, the zone, or the vision that I like to talk about here, you can almost see it, the old Big Ten building would be the next thing that would go in the same direction. So we'd be giving up a lot of commercial space, even though we're only looking at this one. I brought up the suggestion at our last meeting about doing a mixed-use development. Has there been any consideration of doing some type of mixed use? I mean, I could see some stuff, you know, it might look really good from the Peterson side, but I really, I think it'd be nice if we could do something on the Higgins side for the commercial side of it. Have you looked at that at all?
I'll let him answer that.
Yes, Mr. Bennett, that was obviously your main issue last time we were here. And we did ask Cornerstone Commercial Partners to look at it for us. Because if you really look at that outside of you've got office space. And then you've got this, then you've got the Big Ten.
Right.
Besides the beef place, Al's Beef, there's really not a retail. And as we mentioned to Mr. Branham, mentioned the last meeting, no one really in the last 6 or 7 years has come to Park Ridge and say, gee, we like this as a site. And unfortunately, he isn't here to testify, but he is basically saying in his report, and I can tender this letter to you of June 1st, that it would either be an office building, a medical center, or residential. The idea of the retail, and every municipality needs it, every one we go to, because that's where everybody gets their tax dollars, there's no question. But it just, there's no demand for it at that site. It's kind of hidden away. I mean, so it's a destination. It would have to be like almost a breakfast place where you'd say, okay, I know I'm going there.
I still like my idea of a hotel, though.
And, you
We
know,
need that in Park Ridge.
And
but-
actually, I brought that into one of my clients and said, would you bring a hotel in here because I've got a site for it?
Yeah.
And his answer was, you've got up and down Higgins, you've got more on Cumberland. It just, yes, the sales tax, the hotel tax works.
Yeah,
There's just not someone who's saying, in the marketplace, this is a great site for me to be at.
okay.
And we did look at it. We did bring in an expert. I wish he was here to testify to that fact.
Now, I had a question. In terms of the Higgins corridor plan is not that old. It's in 2010. And it does go through that they believe office space and retail would be sustainable there and that it should be in a long-term goal. And even talks about wholesale redevelopment of large sections of the corridor at one time and not likely to happen in the near future. This is back in 2010. However, in the long run, redevelopment is a distinct possibility. It is part of this plan for the Higgins Road corridor to provide a vision for such long-term redevelopment that may occur 10 or more years from the date of the adoption of this plan. And it does talk about office space in Park Ridge, how the occupancy rate of office space in Park Ridge tends to be higher than that down the road in Rosemont, that the available office space in Park Ridge tends to be Class C, and this, you know, is a good opportunity for better office space to be developed or some kind of mixed use. Also talks about adding the Big Ten and talks about how the eastern part of the Higgins corridor is more susceptible to this type of development, the residential. And my thought on all of that is that, you know, how much studying of the Higgins corridor plan has there been with either the owner or developer in terms of all of the, I mean, are Keramos Limited just completely wrong in their analysis of all of this, or?
You know, I'm not going to say that everybody had their opinion, and in 2010, I don't think we looked at the fact that, you know, the big boxes were going out of business.
Well, it doesn't
Things have
talk about-
changed.
It says actually big box is not.
Right, and not here.
appropriate for this.
I agree. So now what we're looking for is small retail. And office.
mixed use.
And he says, office, our expert has indicated the office is inappropriate there. As a use. A medical center would be a use. As of, you know, this property's been out there for a long, long time. No one has come up and said, boy, I'd like to put an office building in. I have an office building with people being able to work from home. The demand for, except for doctors, dentists, lawyers, I mean, I don't know if there was a gentleman who was just here. It's hard getting people into an office building nowadays. There's not that big demand for office. You know, we've got 17,000 square feet in the building. I'm right next to the White Eagle. And we've got great parking. And that building is, you know, whatever.
Corridor plan talks about that the existing office space wouldn't be the same quality of something that they see vision of going in here, and that the demand in Park Ridge versus the Niles or the Rosemonts tends to be higher, and we have higher, at least back when they were analyzing it, higher percentage of office occupancy than our surrounding suburbs. It also talks about all of the opportunities of the office space that's across the way for a mixed use and retail component and all of that, and goes into the numbers. And as I understand it, City of Chicago is looking to put in a large residential area that's going to increase the numbers that they used to say that this is a good long-term vision for the Higgins corridor back in 2010. And again, it talks about the redevelopment 10 or more years, so we're not even at the 10-year point of this plan. So, I mean, I just have a problem with giving up, you know, what the Higgins corridor plan itself calls Mr. K's Garden Center site is a significant future redevelopment opportunity within the Higgins corridor. And then it goes on to talk about, you know, mixed use or office space or all of that. And you know, we're kind of just disregarding all of that by saying, you know, because we're not even at the 10-year point that they estimated this thing on the shorter end should get redeveloped, and we're already giving up on the vision that was put forth here and saying that the only thing that can go in there is you know, residential.
I think that the Cameras plan, and a lot of municipalities use Cameras, and I think what their concept is correct in that back in 2010, as a lawyer, I don't need an office. I can get one of these remote offices, meet you there at 10 o'clock, it costs me whatever dollars. That has changed. You look at your title companies are on Higgins. You've got Fidelity, you've got First American, you've got Chicago Title. But even the airlines moved out of there. Wisconsin Air moved out of the 1300 building. Office space just doesn't have that demand that it had even 10 years ago, because more and more people have the ability to work from home. And more companies are saying, you know what, you can work 2 days from home, you don't need to be here. So you're seeing a different demand for office space. You know, I'm not going to comment on Cameras, you know, they have their statistics, and back in 2010 they prepared this. But I think things have changed, technology has changed. The office market is just not what it used to be. I mean, we talk about, you know, like parking. You know, everybody here, we talk about parking. But you go into the younger people, certainly younger than me, and they're looking and saying, why do we need 2 or 4 parking spaces per dwelling unit? I Uber it. I zip car it. You know, I do all this stuff. Why do I need, I mean, I don't even know what these things are, but why do I need to have all these things? For my purpose, you know, I think parking's important. But the younger people don't. There's a change, there's a shift. And I'm not sure that even, we're going on 8 years of the Camara study, that in 8 years there has been a dramatic shift in usage of property. And the fact that this property's been for sale a long time, there's been no demand for anybody. If this was a hot property for office, for a medical center, for retail, we wouldn't be here today. This would have been sold a long time ago.
But isn't it also true that we have an owner that has been kind of stubborn as to price?
No, I agree. You know, and no one can come in. But I remember, again, you know, I do a lot of this work, that if it was a hot area, unless you were crazy out of line, my developers were buying it. Whether it was for residential, whether it was for commercial. If they thought the economics worked, now if he said, I want $5 million for it, it can stay vacant for ever and ever and ever. But there was really not a movement or even an application to say, gee, let's go for retail, let's do this. We checked with Mr. Branham on that. There hasn't been. Plans are good vehicles, and they give everybody an idea. But in my opinion, the marketplace is the one that projects it. I mean, you go into Des Plaines, they bought a piece of property, and they decided they were going to tell the market what to do with this property. They lost $3 million, you know.
But you also have to agree, being in the real estate world, that there are certain trends and certain bubbles that occur, you know, rental space, other things that occur. And if you don't, these plans are kind of sought to mitigate those problems and look long-term. Short-term tends to create these bubbles that we talk about, whether it's high-rise apartment buildings or other types of developments. Then all of a sudden, everyone's hot and building them, and then all of a sudden, at some point, we overbuild and there's a bubble and then we have all vacant space in it. So I would just hope the Higgins Corridor Plan factors a little more into developers that come in. We have a specific, this isn't even our comprehensive plan, our overall vision. This is very specific to this particular corridor, which is called our gateway to Park Ridge, and you know, it has special meaning here. But that was a comment. One other question I have for you, if I may, Mr. Chair. One of the factors for a map amendment that you guys will be seeking here, and that's the important thing that we're looking at here. The plan, if we get to it, we can talk about that and we can figure out if, you know, what particular is going to be built on the property. But one of the factors that I wanted to ask you about is for a map amendment, is whether adequate public facilities are available, including but not limited to schools, parks, police and fire, roads, sanitary sewers, water lines, or are reasonably capable of being provided prior to the development of the uses which would be permitted on the subject property if the amendment were adopted. And my question is, how much research from your end or the developer's end has gone into that factor to see what the impact is in terms of both our schools, what our current condition of our schools are, and I have some information on that being apparent in you know, the District 64 schools, but also as to parks. We're gonna add 31 more residents here, and we had a referendum last time where we were talking about how much percentage of open space, park space we should have relative to residents here. And my question is, how much thought and research has gone into factors of those to, you know, that play into what you're seeking here for the map?
Well, it's a very valid point. One of the nice thing about having this meeting ahead of time is because it gives us an idea. Clearly, we knew that parks were, schools were an issue. They were brought up by people in the audience, by members there. Have we gone into that yet? And the answer is no. If we're going to go forward, would we be prepared for that? Yes. Park districts, yes. At the last meeting, if I remember, there was a comment from the audience saying that, you know, there were way too many residents in Park Ridge as it is. And the comment was, well, actually, there's less population than there was 20 years ago. So we're encouraged to that extent, and we would certainly, if we're going to go forward with this, we would certainly do that analysis for the parks and the schools and be prepared to answer that at the next step. The issue that, and what makes this a great forum, is the fact that we can walk back out of this meeting and say, okay, we've got a good chance, we've got no chance, we have whatever, and now we decide whether we're going to spend all the money we talked about. But to come in, quite candidly, and that's what, like I said, this forum is unique to municipalities. This is a great forum for developers. We know now, okay, we've made the architectural changes. We know there's an issue, and we know that if we come back, we have to have somebody who's going to do the comparison to the land plan for the corridor. We know that's going to have to happen, and we know what that's going to cost us. We also now know that, and we knew before, that it's really important to come back with the school analysis and the park analysis and the population analysis. We know we need to do that. But there's a kind of a fine line sitting where we are, and that is, do you spend all this money, and then if you say, you know what, we don't like anything about your plan, where are we going? I think that, you know, from just my experience, that the plan design is pretty close to what you want. Issues, as you mentioned, Mr. Bennett mentioned, those are issues that we certainly have to address, okay? But we're going to be talking about that when we walk out. And I think, like I said, I really appreciate your time, and I think it's great for us to be able to now decide what we're going to do.
Mr. Kolpak,
Yes.
jump in here. I think the two things I'll start with is, one is I'm not against this idea. I've said before, I kind of like the concept. I wasn't around for the Plan Commission. I agree with what Commissioner Jim over here says. vehemently disagree with your office space situation. It's not factually true. Cranes, first of all, the offices I'm down in the West Loop, and I'm down in Goose Island, very different market, I will agree. But Cranes Chicago Business, October 10th, 2016, a very credible source that understands real estate very well, is quoting, again, October of 2016, that for the 9th time in the past 10 quarters, suburban Chicago office vacancy fell. Overall vacancy is near its lowest level since 2001. When they wrote that plan commission in 2010, vacancies appear to be, by their charts, around 25%. Now they're down in the low 18s. Rents are climbing. Average rent's gotten over 24 for the first time since 2008. I highly disagree with you. I think what's changed is giant swaths of floors where you have 10, 20, 30,000 square feet don't exist anymore. To what Commissioner Jim said is, today as you're building these, you're looking at smaller suites for entrepreneurial companies like mine. I have 9 people in my company, 10 now, actually. Summer intern. 10 people. So we don't need a big space. We hold about 1,800 square feet, and that's generous for what we really need. So the development of small entrepreneurial type suites with some mixed use, I think it's a viable deal. The problem is Mr. K apparently has aspirations of selling his property at a certain level that's generally only accommodated by high dollar residential sales. We're not here to validate his price per
I agree.
land square footage. So I like the idea. I'm not against it. My last comment, if you're looking at Unit 7, I think the Building 7, was it, Mr. Neary? We love Mr. Neary. Is it Building 7 that hits over the?
Yeah,
Yes.
the west end of Building 7.
So all I'd ask you is there a way to take that frontage and do a setback or put an angled front on that and then widen the building by the square footage you lose on that setback? Is there a way so you don't have to do it?
Probably a way to work that out.
So my advice to you is let's not try and get more setback issues. Let's try, you did a great job of getting away from all the other ones, so I think you made good progress, but the less frustrations we have with little things, I think the better. So that's all I got.
Is there anybody else in the commission who has a comment?
I did, if I may, a couple others, and maybe it's for Mr. Neary. The Higgins corridor plan, to the extent there, because it does contemplate some residential, multi-unit residential, although it says it should be on the eastern portion. It does have, and it's at page 46 of the Higgins corridor plan, multiple family and townhouse development design guidelines. And it's got very specifics in there. How compliant is what you put on here to what the Higgins corridor plan talks about in terms of those design guidelines?
I know that we initially had a meeting with Mr. Kopari at zoning when we first started talking about this concept, and he laid out, sort of explained some of those guidelines to us. So I think whatever we have, I think can definitely work within the guidelines. Is it 100% compliant? I can't in confidence say yes. We haven't gotten an in-depth study into that, but I'm pretty sure we're close.
Thank you.
Anything else? Is there anybody from the audience who'd like to make some comments? Ms. Barkley? Oh, all right. Oh.
Larry Riles, 826 South Prospect, father of 2 in school districts in Park Ridge, District 64 and 207. And I'm just here to make a couple of comments. I appreciate the fact that planning and zoning considers school impact when they make these decisions. But, and I believe I'm right in that most of the children that will be occupying this multi-unit construction will be going to Washington School. And Washington is busting at the seams now. I've been a volunteer at almost every school in the district, and they're even using the Learning Resource Center now to hold some classes at Washington School. So, and there's 5 bubble classes, and if you don't know what a bubble class is, it's one student away from having to have another class at Washington School. Now, of course, we can't predict, we can pretty much what's going to happen this next year. I don't know if there'll be 5 bubble classes or not. I don't know how many children will be coming to this multi-unit construction if it's approved. But those are certainly things that we all have to consider, because every time I turn around and go down a street now, there's multi-unit construction going on in the city of Park Ridge on all sides that impact all 8 schools in District 64. So you can't think too much about school impact. I appreciate it. I'm going to plant a seed here that doesn't have much to do with this, but I'm going to plant it and walk away. I just spent 2 days with school superintendents from other districts. And I brought up school impact fees, and every one of them came from a district that had school impact fees. I don't know why we're not doing that here in Park Ridge. It would certainly ease some of the pain of multi-unit construction, and those fees were varied across the other districts. $250 for a 1-bedroom unit, $3,000 per acre, and it's spread out. For a 2-bedroom unit was more, 3-bedroom unit was more. Some of them had $3,500 an acre. So I just wanted to plant that seed. I realize it's probably a city council issue, and it needs to go before the city council, and I'm going to speak to them about it also. But appreciate your time, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Judy Barkley, 524 Cortland, and thank you, Mr. Riles. Now that makes 3 times folks have heard about impact fees. I said it here at Planning and Zoning, I've said it at City Council, and now you're hearing it again. It is time, and it isn't strictly for multifamily. Every time we tear down a 2-bedroom house and replace it with 4 or 5 bedrooms, it creates an impact. And it isn't just on our schools, it's on our parks, it's on our police, it's on our fire department. These are things we've talked about in the past, and it fell on deaf ears. I hope it's not going to fall on deaf ears now, because we have reached critical stage. If you take a look at all the construction out there, as Mr. Riles said, Greenwood and Elm, that's going to feed into Carpenter, which is also busting at the seams. But that's your job now to see to it that you start talking about it. But I did have a couple comments and or questions. I believe Mr. Neary said they measure from the property line. I think he quoted the ordinance. We measure height from grade up. And I have a question for him, if he'll be kind enough to answer it. Mr. Chair, if you would ask him, is the parking below grade? I didn't understand what he was talking about.
This isn't a public hearing, so I think you can ask him directly.
Yeah, the parking is 3 feet below grade.
Our municipal code prohibits that. I'm sorry. And, you know, they talk about there's no market for retail there. Isn't there talk of an apartment building going in across the street, almost directly across, at the west end of the Marriott lot, which would produce all kinds of people that would come in to retail or a restaurant or anything along those lines, and perhaps even into office space? So, you know, we've got to stop taking our commercial districts and turning them into residential districts. We're jamming up our town, just to put it literally. Everywhere you go, that's what you see now. So, but again, the most important issue that has come out tonight again, and I'm pleased to hear Mr. Riles say it, is the impact fee. And call it a bedroom fee, call it an impact fee, depends on the municipality, but you cannot limit it, in my opinion, to strictly multifamily. It has to be applicable to single families that are taking tear downs and replacing it with double the size. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Tom Sotos, 2341 South Dakota Court. Full disclosure, I'm a resident, but I'm also a school board member. I've been on the school board for 2 years, but I'm not here speaking to you as a school board member. I'm here speaking to you as a resident. Although some of my knowledge comes from being on the school board. I'm not going to belabor the point that Mr. Riles and everybody else has about impact fees. I think you guys get it. I think you're going to go back and address it. I hope the council addresses it. It's important. However, I do want to belabor the point that the impact on our schools is something that must be taken into consideration when deciding any type of conversion from commercial to residential. All our schools are at their full capacity. We are using every room possible to teach in. We have field school who is teaching in an old cafeteria, in some cases closets. We have schools who are doing what is called classroom sharing, where when a teacher is not using her classroom or his classroom, they're allowing other teachers, music programs, other programs to sign up and use those classrooms. 31 new units in a space that had none is inevitably going to bring more students to our district. And those students are going to feed to Washington. And Washington is using the LRC, as Mr. Riles said, for classrooms. Washington has a space issue as well. If half the units bring in children, it's going to cause a problem at Washington. We, as a school district, will have to then address that problem. How will we address it when we have limited space? We may have to build more classrooms. We may have to build additions to some of our schools. We may be forced to reopen Jefferson, which then would require us to redo our boundaries. All those things are going to cost D64 a lot of money, which we all know D64 board members don't pay for it out of their pocket. They reach into your pockets and all the pockets of the taxpayers to get this stuff paid for. So I'm asking that you really take into consideration the schools as the parks and everything else when you are making these decisions. As for Mr. Argionis's comments towards the value of the property, I would like to reiterate what you said. I believe this property can and will eventually be used and purchased and developed by a commercial developer if the price was at a level that a commercial developer can turn a profit. The price that it's selling for today is based on only a residential developer making money. So if you approve it, the residential developer will make his money, the property owner will make his money, and I have no problem with that. I like when property owners make money, and I like when developers make money. However, I think our job, your job, and all our jobs as residents and members of the community is to make sure that the entire community benefits, not just the one individual property owner and the one individual developer. And I think the best benefit for Park Ridge would be for this corridor to maintain and remain commercial, and we would do our best to try to keep it that way and at least give it an opportunity to be that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Langdon?
In 1924 Canfield, all good points, not going to repeat them. Typically, when I come up here, I will go to one place and one place only, and that's the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance sets up standards for us to look at any changes, whether they're map amendments, text amendments, site plan approvals, or PUDs. The provisions and the standards in the zoning ordinance are very specific. They are not there as a suggestion. They're there for us to follow on boards and commissions. Those standards are set forth not only in our zoning ordinance, but by state statute. They're not just a guideline. They're there for a reason. And the reason is for this particular case, what we need to be looking at strictly, it's a lovely plan, great, and on any other given day, if it was on an R3 lot, we'd be looking at a beautiful plan, but it isn't. This is a business lot, period. The 12 standards that are in the zoning ordinance are very specific when it comes to map amendments. The way I read it, and you have them, so I'm not going to read them out loud, but I don't know that there was one standard that this request for what initially will be a zoning change or a map amendment, I don't think it's met those standards. And, you know, I know we look at development and maybe we like to compare it to somewhere else in town. And so to be clear, because anybody that reads any of the blogs or hears scuttlebutt around town, they say, look, we redeveloped the public works site. Yeah, we did. We redeveloped it from an R2 to an R3. It was already a residential district. But more importantly, that was a city-owned property that wasn't generating any revenue whatsoever. Zero. No, not even property tax. This particular property right now is generating property tax and retail tax. It has a very high level of generating revenue, particularly as a business. It isn't a vacant lot, as some people say it's better to have something than nothing. It isn't nothing now. There's a property owner that pays property tax on 2 acres of business property. It's pretty high that's a pretty good sum for the city, by the way, in addition to whatever sales they make. Map amendments or any zoning change should never, ever be done in haste because somebody is willing, and I hate that term, but it's used way too often. When somebody is willing to develop, oh my God, they're here, they're willing to invest. No. The zoning ordinance should never be used to ensure the private transaction of a sale of a piece of property. Never. That is such a slippery slope that anybody, a single family lot, a business lot, an R2 and R3 could come in and say, I could get more money for my lot if you rezone it to something else versus me just selling it as a single family home. I could get way more money if you rezone my lot and I get to sell it as an R2, R3 or R4. I mean, dangerous. It's very dangerous. So if we could stick to the standards, and Mr. Hanlon, you did, thank you very much for pointing out that a private transaction is probably not something that we need to interfere with. If the price is right, they'll get offers. If you're going to be a holdout to try to get the best price possible, and I get it, I understand it, you do want to get the best price. But if the only way you're going to get the best price is through this and city council to change the zoning on a piece of property, we're crossing a line we probably shouldn't cross as a city. And on that, because everybody else had very similar things to say, I'm not going to repeat. But keep this in the back of your mind. At the mere thought of a denial from this board, when the first plan didn't meet the ordinance, how readily and quickly they came back and met the zoning ordinance. Just keep that in mind the next time the next developer comes in and says they can't possibly meet our ordinance. They did it in 2 weeks. Just a little something to keep back here.
Thank you.
Pat Livensparger, 413 Cortland. Last meeting, I spoke to you about the impact I felt at schools. Emerson, the newest school, now have, I think, every grade level, every core, teachers are sharing their classrooms. Maybe in my core, only one teacher does not share her classroom with another teacher. So that's four rooms, 3 of them are doubled up on. So the teacher neither teacher has easy access to her room for half of the day to make her lesson plans. And it's in every grade level, the newest school in the building. And we get our children from Field, Carpenter, and Franklin. So something to think about, just to build on what Mr. Riles and Soto said. But I didn't want to speak about schools tonight too much. I wanted to speak about the fact of changing a commercial property. And someone last time mentioned that It would be a better tax base. Right now, in Cook County, the 2015 tax rates for residential properties are 2.87. The commercial business tax rates are 7.18. And as we all know, those are going to be higher this time around. That's for a business property, you get almost 3 times the property tax revenue that you get for residential. Why would we give that up? And you have no drain on city services such as library or, more importantly, schools. Yet that tax revenue is benefiting the schools at 7.18% in 2015. So there's a tremendous tax advantage to the city to keep that property business because of the way Cook County taxes business. I think it would be not a good idea to give that up, even with an impact fee. When you look at that tax, and the schools get 75% roughly of our property tax. And with the business that's there now, if you can believe the internet, which I'm not sure you always can, on Manta, it says that Mr. K's made $970,000 in income as a business. It's a lot of tax if there was real, or if there was sales tax on some of that. I don't know. And again, it's just something I read on Manta. I don't even know if that site's true. But they pulled that number out of somewhere. So to change from commercial business to residential, as Mrs. Langen said, does not warrant the text amendment standards that you need to follow. There's a tremendous benefit because of the way Cook County taxes businesses to keep that property commercial. The Higgins Corridor Plan calls for it. And you would not have to even think about 7 children, 11 children, however many children might come into that development. So it's something to think about, but I don't know how you can look at those 2 tax rate numbers and not say it would be to the benefit of Park Ridge to keep that commercial. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I need to reintroduce myself.
Would you please just...
Javier Costantino, 457 Northwest Highway. So, all of these great things I've been hearing here, I think it begs the question, what's Park Ridge doing about schools? If every school's bursting at the seams. I have 3 kids. My 3 kids are going to have 3 kids. Their 3 kids are going to... Populations increase, especially in nice areas where people want to live and raise a family. So, whether it's commercial, residential, at the end of the day, you still got problems with these schools. No? A few years ago, people talked about, we need a new police department. We need this, we need that. Our population.
We're
city
taking the
services are
schools
less.
into factor for some of the developments that are going on, but if you have concerns about the schools themselves, you could probably take that to the school board meetings.
It's an observation. I mean, what's, who handles construction of schools? The school district?
Yes.
Feedback from the city? I mean, these are Park Ridge schools, right?
That's correct, but that's not under our purview.
Okay. No, it's just, it's a shame, they want to invest money, but everyone's using the schools as an excuse, but the schools are already at capacity. So it seems like that's, you guys are chasing your tail.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other comments from the applicant? Certainly. Next on the agenda, we have the City Council Liaison Report. Alderman Wilkening, anything? Okay, zoning ordinance provisions. Any, John? Public comment from non-agenda items. No? Then we come to the last. Adjournment.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Hope I didn't screw up too bad.
They didn't really give me any feedback.